Today I'm going to be talking about Katharina von Bora. Katharina von Bora was a hero in the Protestant Reformation by providing an example of marriage and what using one's home as a means of ministry looked like. When thinking about who I wanted to choose as a woman who has impacted the Christian tradition, I really wanted to focus in on Katharina von Bora because her story has impacted me throughout this class because it shows what a ministry looks like in a different context. Usually when we think of ministry, we tend to go to a pastor in the church or leading a small group or serving the homeless or something in that ministerial role. But so rarely do we think of our own dwelling place, our home, as a place to serve and make that a place where people can come and seek refuge and find rest in. And I think Katharina's story is super impactful for that. So she was born in 1499 and passed away in 1552. So she was one of the women of the Reformations in the 15th to 17th century. So this means the Protestant Reformation. She was specifically located in Germany, specifically in Wittenberg, Magdeburg, and Torgau. So Germany in the 15th to 17th century was kind of in an uproar. The Reformation was there during the time, which is where Martin Luther actively spread the word throughout his lifetime. And he really brought the Protestant Reformation to Germany and the movement as a whole. The Reformation was a time of religious, cultural, and social change where activists such as Martin Luther were dissatisfied with the Catholic Church and different things that the Catholic Church were not measuring up to or aligning with the Bible in, and people like Martin Luther wanted to make changes in the church. So where does Katharina von Bora fit into all of this? Well, she was married to Martin Luther. So the guy that was the activist in the Protestant Reformation was Katharina's husband. Katharina was a former nun who remarried during the Reformation. So during the Reformation, a lot of nuns started to leave their convents and get remarried, and Katharina was one of them. So that makes her a part of the Lutheran denomination. So Lutheranism emerged in the 16th century in the Protestant Reformation by Martin Luther. Lutheranism focuses on justification by faith alone, the authority of the scripture, and priesthood by all Christians. It basically recognizes baptism and the Lord's Supper as manifestations of God's grace. And Katharina, who now we know is Martin Luther's wife, she supported this tradition and eventually left her convent, like I was saying, in support of the Reformation. So she heard news of this Reformation and supported its ideals so much, so supported the ideals of justification by faith alone and the authority of Scripture and the priesthood of all Christians, and saw that those were things that she agreed with. So she left her convent in support of these ideals. But what was it like as a nun for Katharina? She was sent to the convent at age 5 or 6, which is pretty young, and she went from student to novice and then to nun eventually. She chose the vocation of being a nun, like a lot of other people, to allow her to have a better shot at getting close to God and at pleasing God. In the convent, Katharina was educated like other nuns, basically always reading, writing, learning about religious doctrine. She learned about managing a household, which all these things were going to become very useful for her when she was partnering with Martin Luther. But while she was in the convent, Luther's teachings started to get way to the convent. A lot of Luther's teaching argued against monasteries and convents, and it started to get to the convent, and some of the nuns were writing secretly to him. So in 1523, 12 nuns, including Katharina, were smuggled out of the convent. And then Luther welcomed them, but it wasn't very good look on him to have 12 nuns, and he started to try to get families to house them, or husbands to husband them up, and basically all of them got settled after 2 years, so all 11 of them got settled in 2 years, but Katharina. And Katharina didn't want no regular husband. She only wanted to marry Luther or one of his fellow reformers. So, in 1525, Luther and Katharina got married. So, getting married to Luther, during the Reformation, Luther was a busy man. So, Katharina ran the Luther household in Wittenberg, including taking the role of the accountant. So she handled all the money, and which was big as the wife of Martin Luther. She also became a farmer, so she would buy and improve land, and then she would farm on those land, and the food that she would farm, she would provide for her family and guests. She bore 6 children, and she was a big pastor to her husband and challenged her. She wasn't quiet. She was feisty, and she rebuked him a lot. She provided refuge for Protestant refugees in her home, which is really important, and she just allowed her home to be open to those who were seeking need. So that leads us to home as ministry. Something that is so impactful about Katharina's story is she turned her home into a guest home for boarding students, Protestant refugees, and visitors, because a lot of people during the Reformation wanted to speak and seek advice and just be in the audience of Martin Luther as he spoke the wisdom that he did. So she allowed people to stay there. So she cooked and she gardened and she ran a small business. She did all that she could to support and feed the visitors in her home and her 6 children. Luther called her the morning star of Wittenberg because she would wake up at 4 a.m. to do all these tasks, to cook, garden, run a small business, because she wanted to support all of the people in her home. She also operated a hospital on the side if that all wasn't enough, taking in sick people and ministering alongside nurses. And she just provided a haven for those that were fleeing persecution and all. So this is super impactful in the Christian tradition because it allows this picture of what a loving, welcoming home should look like. She paved the way for people to see a role of a woman who ran this household and allowed people to come in and seek refuge and pastor to them, and alongside her husband, serving alongside her husband. So in memory of this amazing woman, there's a statue outside of their old house in Wittenberg, Germany. There's a wedding ring on her hand, if you can see on her left hand, that people think if you rub it, it will bring you a happy marriage like Luther and Katharina's. I love how she is caught in mid-stride because, as we know about Katharina, she was constantly running around her household trying to do the most so that she could support the people in her household. So that's the statue that is in her honor. So just reflecting on this amazing woman, I just thought it was super impactful to see how a woman can open up her home for ministry. And I think in my own life, this is totally something that I would want to do, is just make my home a place where people feel welcomed, people feel safe and ready to learn about the word of the Lord. And I think that's something that Katharina did so well, is she was inclusive and she allowed people to just come into her home no matter how she was feeling that day. She woke up at 4 a.m. and got all of her work done so that she could feed and support these people. and she just allowed anyone to become her family. And I think that is super special, and totally taking on the role of what God calls us to do is to love him and love others well. And Katharina, with her faith story of becoming a nun and then leaving to start this ministry, I think she just totally was obedient to the Lord and the call that the Lord had on her life. And she always led with grace, and I just think that her story is so impactful. Here, that we're excited. Thank you.